Good afternoon, everybody, so from my side. So it happens to me to come here pretty often. That means that it happens to me to stay in Europe pretty often as well. And the typical question that's been asked when I'm there is, but what's the secret of Silicon Valley? And I don't know, it's quite difficult to provide an answer. At the end, the most convincing one is that companies here are buying a lot of companies and typically are buying a lot of startups. So continuous acquisition, at the end, I believe, is the real secret of the Silicon Valley ability to continue to innovate and rejuvenate. But the problem is when you're saying something, at the end, you are convinced that you are right. And being a part of me, a professor, sometimes I ask myself, is just my belief, or probably is also true as well. And so since a few months, we are working with our friends at CrunchBase to try digging a lot into their data to try to see if what I'm keep saying is true or not. And so we're trying to see if this myth of Silicon Valley, meaning the secret of continuous innovation is based on continuous acquisition, A, and B, US companies and Silicon Valley companies are way more acquisitive than European and companies from the other region of the world, is true or not. That's what we have done in the last month. And so we analyzed approximately 15,000 acquisitions from the CrunchBase database. So disclaimer, all this research is based on the CrunchBase database. That is not perfect. That is not covering 100% of the world, but it's large enough. So we dig into 15,000 M&A transactions. We clean it up 10,000 of them. At the end, we focus on just 6,000 transaction, M&A transaction happened after 2012 because these transactions were involving a startup company. So we are focusing only on acquisition involving a startup company. And we focusing mostly on two regions, United States and Europe. Why that? Because approximately we noticed that of the 60 to 100 acquisitions that we investigated, 92% of them were referred to US and European startups. So meaning that US companies, European companies are mostly focusing on many activities inside US and Europe. Just 8% of the transactions are referred to the rest of the world. So just focus the analysis on what is called the Transatlantic region. And what is the main result? The main result is I was right, that the US companies have definitely a gigantic acquisition appetite. And the US companies buy 4 times more startups than European companies. Using TechCrunch words, US buyers gorge while European companies nibble. You see, of the overall 6.2 thousand acquisition, 82% have been performed by US companies. Just 80% have been performed by European companies. This is the main result. If we look at what they are buying, who is buying what, you see that for US companies, 88% of the acquisition are focused on the US territory. So they are just buying 12% of the acquisition referring European startups, while European companies are buying domestic, meaning European regional startups, for 68%. And 32% of the acquisition referring to US companies, US startups. If you look at the value of the transaction, and another disclaimer is pretty important, keep in mind that in the CrunchBase database, just 60% of the transaction have a disclosed amount. Disclaimer of the disclaimer is that typically the largest acquisition disclose the amount while the smaller one do not, so we are not losing that much, but keep in mind that could be something that is not exactly scientific in here. You see that 80% of the value of the US acquisition remains in the US, 20% come to Europe, while in terms of European companies, 32% of the acquisition absorb approximately 60% of the transactional value. So using other words, US startups looks to be way more expensive than European startups when it comes to acquire them. And you see the median price, we're talking about approximately the double. US startup has a median price of acquisition of 110 million, while European startups, the median price is 60 million. Another interesting data point that actually is confirmed by the research that we are doing in Europe as part of a Startup Europe partnership platform, 44% of the European startups that have been acquired by US companies. So 1 out of 2 European startups, if it comes to an exit, and the exit is an M&A, has been acquired by US company. So our stuff looks to be interesting and appealing for US buyers. Other interesting data point is if you look at the top 15 acquirers of the world, they are all US companies. Not a surprise. And even not a surprise that 11 of the top 15 are companies from Silicon Valley. If you want to find the first European company in the list is the German SAP, that is 33rd. Another interesting data point is the biggest acquirer in the world is Google. Again, not a surprise. But Google in itself is buying more companies than all the top 15 European acquirers together. So they have a big appetite in Mountain View here. So hopefully it will not be the same for dinner because we don't have enough food. So just kidding. And so you can see the list. Another interesting data point. So the other question is, okay, but why European companies are not buying that much startups? I think with the main hurdle, the main problem is culture. We don't have a culture of acquiring other companies in Europe. Because it's part of our DNAs as buyers, try to do all the things inside. And it's part of our DNAs as startups to try not to sell companies, because selling a company is not perceived as an exit, as a win, but it's perceived as a sort of giving up. So there is a sort of big cultural difference between Europe and US and Silicon Valley that probably explain most of this data. And an interesting data point, if you look at the list of the top 15 acquirers, what do you notice? Question to you. Most of UK, yes, good point. Look at the company names. You see that 5 out of 15 of these names are companies founded after 2000, in the new millennium. You see the Zalando of the world, you see the Just Eat of the world, you see the Spotify of the world. So meaning that the most acquisitive companies, guess what, are companies coming from the startup world. Because the startup world knows the importance of time and the importance to move with speed, and the importance to make acquisition as part for building up a strategy able to maintain them on the edge. And that's something that I think is quite interesting. Looking at Europe, I think there are 2 Europes. One is UK, and then the rest of Europe. I think the title is it's going to sound a sort of a joke, but it was not. I think London only looks like the exit capital, and UK is the exit capital of Europe. It is still not Brexit intended. And if you see the number of exits that happen in London are the same as Germany, France, Benelux, Spain, and Italy, and other countries that you like altogether. So we have US, And then by far we have UK, and then by far we have the rest of Europe. That's the way to quickly reading this number. You see also the top location. We will discuss later on in a panel if we have some emerging apps in Europe. Looks like that London is the top ones, and then there is something interesting in France, something interesting in Germany. Actually, in Germany there are 2 hubs, Berlin and Munich. Spain, we have another 2 hubs, Madrid and Barcelona. Could be a good question to ask ourselves, if it makes sense for a small country to have 2, 3 hubs instead of 1, but this is a lot of discussion that we can have later on. Finally, and then I will deliver you to the coffee break. This is most wanted things at this point. We make another interesting analysis. We try to cross the data of the acquisitions by the nationality of the acquirers with the data of the acquisition by the nationality of the acquired companies. So we look at the same thing from the sell side and from the buy side, and we create what we call the exit acquisition ratio. Technically, an ecosystem, the ratio is 1 if the number of startups have been sold is the same the number of startups that have been acquired. If the numbers are below 1, meaning that an ecosystem is producing less startups than the startup that is buying. While the ratio is above 1, you find an ecosystem is producing more startups than startups have been acquired. What you see over here, you see that Europe is 1.2, 1.3, meaning that Europe is producing more startups than the startup that has been acquired by European companies, while US is below the parity, is 0.96 if I can remember. And then if you look at the different countries, you look at different cities, you find some interesting things. First of all, you see that most of the European countries are above the parity. You see Spain is 2.5, Italy is 2.5. Typically the young ecosystem are producing now a lot of startups, but they are not acquiring startups. And if you look at the data, for example, from the US cities, you find cities like Atlanta that is buying a lot of startups but is not able to produce the same number of startups. New York, same thing. The Boston area is getting a bit better, but same thing. While if you go to Silicon Valley, you find a sort of balanced situation that you can find situation where Mountain View, obviously, the number are dragged by the presence of Google. So this is some interesting data that you can find. So I don't want to kill you with more stuff, just to give you a glimpse of the research that we have done. I'd like to thank you, CrunchBase, for helping us for putting together all this work. And the research is available for download from minderbridge.org.com website. Startup Your Partnership is for free. So take a look and let us know if you have any comments or any further inputs.